And we have a couple of sessions to go. We've been doing the Tamei Mitzvot, the reasons for the commandments. And remember, Rambam is giving us a rational approach to the commandments of the Torah based upon the text of the Torah itself, and more importantly, on his understanding of the history of history in general. In other words, Rambam has a historicist approach. He says that if you look at the Torah and you want to read it entirely rationally, you can do so. Much of it is there to fight idolatry. And whilst idolatry may have been more serious in the old days, there are still plenty of idolatry about. In fact, even the people who seem to be most religious may in fact be very idolatrous indeed, because as far as he's concerned, superstitious sentiments, lack of rational planning, understanding, all of this is a form of idolatry. So idolatry is still there. And we need to be on our guard all the time to not fall into the trap of becoming.
I don't hear.
You have to unmute, Rabbi.
Sorry.
See that? There we are. Okay,
Sorry.
let's try again. Excellent. We'll try again. Rambam, his reasons for the commandments, which is what we are doing. Rambam has set out and continues to give us reasons for the commandments that are in accordance with the text of the Torah. He specifically excludes Talmudic interpretations. In fact, all of the Torah Shebaal Peh. He is not going to give us a course in Talmud or Poskim, though of course he's very well aware of all of that, because that's not his agenda. He is also historicist. In other words, the Rambam is prepared to say that there are things that were written in the Torah that were very important in their time, especially to defeat the idolatrous concepts that were rife in the ancient world. And therefore, they were very dramatic in their age. Since then, things have changed somewhat. Although the Rambam, of course, makes the fight against idolatry the centerpiece of his theology, because even the most religious amongst us are guilty of terrible idolatrous thought and practice. Whether we kiss a mezuzah because we think it's going to protect our home, or whether we go to fortune tellers, or we base our decisions upon irrational factors, all that is idolatry. It's idolatry in a different form. And also, of course, if we start thinking about God in any way that seems to indicate that he is anything other than absolutely unknowable, then of course we're also making a huge mistake and are descending into a very puerile level of theology, and we are guilty of idolatry. So we always need to be reminded about that. So the historicism, though, was very important for him. He said that he read all the books he could on what the Muslim world called the Sabians, the book of Nabatean agriculture, the book of Tom Tom, all of these books that describe how the Sabians believed that they could influence their lives by all sorts of what we would call superstitious practices. So this is a favorite target of the Rambam in his Tamei HaMitzvot, and we've read enough of them to have gotten the point there. So with that in mind, we are going to move on. We've already done 8 of the classes. Let's have a look at the 9th, 10th, and however many we can see. I'm going to try and share a screen. And here it is, okay? So, 9th class, the forms of worship. So, Rambam divides his classes of mitzvot in his Moreh Nevukhim into 14. The 9th one is forms of worship. So I'm going to go down the list. In fact, Brian, you look like a good reading candidate this evening. Could I get you please to read? Line
You
6,
can.
forms of worship.
Forms of worship. The precepts of the 9th class are those enumerated in Sefer Ahava.
Now, Sefer Ahava belongs to which work of Maimonides?
Yad HaChazaka.
Yad HaChazaka, his halachic work, and the mitzvot that he deals with in Sefer Ahava are Kriyat Shema, Tfilah, Birchat HaKohanim, Tfilin, Muzuzah, Sefer Torah, Tzitzit, Brachot, including Birchat HaMazon, and Milah. What is interesting, perhaps, is that Milah appears in Sefer Ahava because in Sefer Ahava, in the Halakha, the philosophy is that of a sign between God and his people and of closeness. It's a knot. So a sign that makes us close to God. So we pray to him. We bless him before we eat of his food. We bless him afterwards. We put on tefillin, mezuzah. We say the Shema and we circumcise. In the Moreh Nevukhim, however, we're going to encounter, excuse me, Brit Milah in the 14th class, which is the class that deals with sexual offenses and the restraining of the sexual drive. So there is a difference here. Why did he do that? Well, halachically speaking, he has a theology that dictated the 14 books of the Mishnah Torah. In terms of the rational enterprise, this is utility. How does it help us? What are the direct messages that we need to get from the mitzvot? And here he has a different view. We've talked about that. In fact, there's a lot of commentary on the differences between the Sefer of the Yad HaChazaka, the Mishnah Torah, and the classification of mitzvot here. But know that there is a difference. Know that the circumcision is one of the examples. And know that we're going to talk a little about Maimonides and sex when we get to the 14th class. In the meantime, Brian, please, the beginning of line 7, the reason is obvious.
Apparently, the reason is obvious. The actions prescribed by them serve to remind us continually of God and of our duty to fear and to love him, to keep all his commandments and to believe concerning God that whichever religious person must believe. That which every religious person must believe.
Okay, what does every religious person need to believe according to Maimonides? Well, it is of course that when we do and say these things, put on tefillin and say Shema, that's not the end of the road. The real goal is the ideal, if you like, contemplation, the state we are so intellectually in tune with God, okay, that we really don't need all of these aids and props, but they help us. And because our lives are like a very narrow bridge, okay, and we can fall off easily, we keep on doing them to keep us on the straight and the narrow. But our ideal is to get to the degree of prophecy, and we may or may not become prophets, that depends upon God, but at least to be at this highest place. And remember, the Rambam's book before Sefer Ahava is Sefer HaMada, the book of knowledge. And how does Sefer Mada end? It ends with the pungent line, Al pi hadat tiyeh ahava. According to understanding is love. This is a cognitive Platonic type of love, okay? And therefore Sefer Ahava is based actually upon knowledge. So that's what every religious person must believe. Well, every right-thinking religious person. There are many wrong-thinking religious people, according to Rambam. Okay, we don't need to emphasize that point again. This class includes...
This class includes the laws of prayer, reading of Shema, grace, and duties connected with these, blessings of the priests, tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzit, acquiring a scroll of the law and reading it at certain times. The performance of all of these precepts inculcates into our hearts useful lessons. All this is clear, and a further explanation is superfluous as being a mere repetition and nothing else.
Rambam always says it as he thinks it is. He's told us time and time again in the Moreh where we're going with our religious practices and our religious recitations. He doesn't need to repeat it here. If you've forgotten it, go back and read what we've already read over a period of several months. So on with the motley, we now go to the 10th class. Since you're on, Brian, why not? Line 17.
The sanctuary, its utensils, and the Kohanim, Maimonides' instrumental anti-idolatry approach to the temple.
What does that mean? Well, why was the temple built according to the Rambam in the Moreh Nevukhim?
Apparently to fight the idolatry.
Jean, you have to say that again slowly.
Apparently to fight idolatry.
Of course, to fight idolatry. Can we have a little more detail?
Especially according to what I understand, the ideal, I don't know, would be not to make sacrifice, but we do it because the crowd cannot live without it.
Okay, you've jumped the gun a bit because that's the next class. But the Mishkan, the Bet HaMikdash is the same thing. Why was the Mishkan built at all, says the Rambam? Was it because God needs a physical place for his service to take place in? What do you think? The answer is, of course, Brian?
No.
No. And why were we commanded? Because we built a golden calf. Golden calf tells God that the people of Israel are not ready for his advanced and abstract type of service. So he has to give them something that's going to wean them slowly from the physical temple to no temple. In fact, he says, you know what? We read this line. We've done very well for several thousand years with no Bet HaMikdash. Have we not? Of course we have. A great Judaism contributed to the world, and we had no Bet HaMikdash. And all those ancient peoples who had so many shrines and wonderful temples throughout the ancient Near East, they're all gone. But we are still here with our service of God. So Rambam has a precedent in the Midrash, as we explained. And why is Truman Tetzaveh before Kitisa, before the golden calf? As the Orach Chaim says, Lahakdim Trufa Lamaka. We had to have the remedy there before the malady. And so God says, you know, I work with human beings according to their limitations that I've placed upon them. I see they cannot move too fast, and therefore I'm going to go to the next best step. I'm going to give them a Bet HaMikdash, but it's going to be a different Bet HaMikdash. It's not going to be the same as the pagan ones. I'm slowly going to get them out of pagan ones into my type. And that was a challenge. Believe me, the Israelites in the period of the Tanakh did not like the austere temple that they had in Shiloh or eventually in Yerushalayim. Far too austere. They wanted a good, fleshy, carnal, pagan cult. And every single mitzvah is there to limit and to restrain and to take us away. So Rambam has a good understanding of psychology. And God apparently teaches us that we need to act that way. Of course, God knew that we would fail. But since we don't understand how he thinks, we only learn from him that when we try to get an agenda going, we have to take into account people's limitations. You can see this in the Exodus story, which is germane for Pesach. In the beginning, Moshe and Aaron were going with the elders of Israel to Pharaoh. God would step in and Pharaoh would say, you can go. But Hazkenin nishmatu echad echad. The people couldn't bring themselves to that direct confrontation with Pharaoh. So plan B came into action. And then Moshe and Aaron themselves have to take Pharaoh through the whole process of the plagues. Everything is a matter of gradation according to psychological need. And we always have to be aware of this continuum. It's a powerful pedagogic principle. So that's what I mean by instrumental anti-idolatry approach to the temple. So let's have a look. Brian, could you please continue?
Laws aimed at inculcating awe and respect for the sanctuary. Law of Me'ilah.
Okay, So Rambam, amongst many other things, describes the fact that, well, the first thing that God has to say is that my temple, you have to be very respectful. He wasn't casual about that. Et mikdashi tirau. So a lot of dignity, even though it wasn't God's ideal. And mi'ilah, you can't use the temple for anything secular, for anything profane. And mi'ilah is a very serious issue, which is discussed at length in a very difficult Masechet. So we start off with making this new type of Bet HaMikdash very important. Now the Rambam, I'm going to go this, and I'll come back for reasons I mentioned. No mention of Har Habayit. Prohibitions on cutting altar stones and having an even maskit. The avoidance of sexuality. I'm going to take a little time over this. Rambam talks a lot about the difference between the austere temple, austere, serious, very stern, and, as I said, the lush, carnal, pagan type of temple. And for example, take the pasuk in Parashat Yitro. It's a bit of a puzzling, very puzzling pasuk. What's the last pasuk in Parashat Yitro? Anybody remember?
Not to go with staircase on the Mizbeach.
Jean, what can I say? Ein kamocha. Le meilleur des hommes. Vous êtes.
Vous
Okay.
êtes optimiste?
C'est la vérité. ולא תעלה במעלות על מזבחי. ולא תגלה ערוותך עליו. It's a puzzling pasuk. Don't go up on steps on my altar, because you might show your nakedness. You might expose your genitals. Seems very odd. Why is it there? I mean, you know, we're so holy when we read the Ten Commandments and standing up and all that. And then it's almost like the Torah is a little off color almost. So, of course, all the classical Parshanim say, it doesn't mean lo tigale ervatcha alav, your physical nakedness. It means lo tale b'ma'alot al mizbachim. Don't become a Baal Gava. Don't give yourself ma'alot, as it were, degrees, okay, as in shir ma'alot. Don't make yourself superior, because if you make yourself superior, then surely your faults will then be paraded out in public. Those people who like self-praise and who try to show everybody how marvelous they are, have usually got things to hide. So if you're going to make yourself, expose yourself, then, so it's like, but of course, why would you have a little Musa drosha at the end of a section about making me an altar of earth and not using your garzen, not using a metal implement to cut it? Now here again, our midrashim come in and say, why don't we cut these stones for the altar with an axe? Why? Because the kotzer cannot be a marich. Says the midrash, iron is used for swords. Swords shorten life. The mizbeach kapara lengthens life. It gives us forgiveness and we can live again. So we don't want the makatzer, the element that shortens life, to be the marich. But this is a nice drasha. What's he got to do with the book of Exodus immediately after the 10 Commandments? And you shall have no other gods beside me, and you shall make no graven image. What's he got to do with anything? So here again, the Rambam is very historicist. He says, of course, that pasuk is to avoid sexuality, which was an inherent part of pagan ritual. Let me read to you from the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, volume 7, pages 61 to 63. Not all 2 pages, of course. In ancient Egypt, women played a central role in the temple cult, especially in shrines devoted to goddesses. They fulfilled both secondary and prominent roles in the rituals, and their singing and dancing were integral parts of the sacrificial rites. The role of women in the idolatrous cults was particularly prominent in Mesopotamia. In the Sumerian temple of Inanna, sacred prostitution was a central part of the ritual in the temple. The high priestesses performed a sacred marriage. What's the Greek term for a sacred marriage? Greek. Hieros gamos. And Does anybody have an association with hieros gamos? It's all quiet. Okay. Brian is reaching for...
Bigamy?
No, hieros gamos. Look it up
Hmm.
properly, Brian. Okay? Go into your computer. But this is the sacred marriage that all sorts of cults. Anybody remember the Da Vinci Code?
Mhm.
It's also
Vaguely.
there. Correct, Marcel?
Vaguely, I can remember.
Vaguely. Okay, never mind. But this is an ancient tradition going back. So in the temple, you have sex acts, whether it's to do with proliferation of fertility. But this was the main thing. And remember, when they worship the golden calf, what does it say? Vayeshvu ha'am le'echol v'lishtot. The people sat down to eat and to drink. What's the next phrase?
Litzchok.
ויקומו להולות.
Litzachek.
It's
And
okay.
what does
Litzachek.
that mean?
תלוי.
So the same.
V'hinei Yitzchak metzachek et Rivka ishto.
No.
Metzachek. This was licensed,
Hmm.
exciting sex in the temple precinct. And Maimonides explains in his Moreh Nevukhim that this is reason for much of the temple ritual that we have in the Torah. It's a struggle against a whole cult that had as its center and centerpiece the carnal, the promiscuous, and the licentious. Male priests also fulfilled a similar role, tells us the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. So when you have a male priest going up the stairs, exposing himself, people might have gotten the wrong idea. So very strict. V'lo ta'aleh ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi, v'lo tigaleh ervatcha alav. Everything now makes very perfect rational sense. Let's read from the legacy of the Sumerians in Western civilization. The 1 meter high carved alabaster uruk vase shows the presentation of offerings at the temple of Inanna. That's our most favorite Sumerian goddess. The third tier illustrates naked priests bringing the offerings into the temple. The fifth tier represents the culmination of the sacrificial rite in sacred marriages, in which the naked priests represent male gods. Brian, did you get to look up hieros gamos?
Not yet.
Yeah, you
No.
got a second. And then you can read it. What do you have? Hieros gamos.
Without going so far, if you
Yeah.
look at the end of Balak, you see also exactly the same.
Exactly. The Elohei Midian
Okay.
are a means,
Benot,
are purveyed to the Israelites by the Benot
Midian.
Midian. Okay, Brian, we'll leave it for another time. Okay? So
Fine.
let,
The Webster Dictionary defines it as a marriage of uncertain origin.
okay, you need to do, we need to have a lot more reading there. Okay, but the dictionary is not very clever. Okay, so reasons for prohibition of cutting altar stones and having an even maskit. At the end of Yitro, you shall not cut an altar stone with a metal implement. Of course, this is idolatry. This is what the idolaters did. So the Jewish temple is not to be built in an idolatrous style. And Rambam will give you the page reference in the book of Nabatean Agriculture or the book of Tom Tom or any of these idolatrous texts. And he says more than once, I read them all. Imagine a Rosh Yeshiva in Brisk today spending his time combing through the books about idolatrous and superstitious practices. Anyhow, the same thing with an even maskit, a colored stone. We do not prostrate ourselves on colored stones, could include mosaics as well. okay, because the pagans did that. We know that from synagogue remains we've discovered in the north of Israel, okay? It's a difficult habit to fight. You want to bow down on a beautiful mosaic, and the more nymphs there are, the better it is, okay? So all of this is what the Rambam sees in the prohibitions. We, of course, Even Maskit, we don't ever bow down, therefore, on stone, and we've taken it to be, funnily enough, that we mustn't put our heads down directly on a stone floor, because it's to do with the bowing rather than to do with the colors that made up this. And a maskit is a tapestry. There used to be a shop in Jerusalem called maskit, which was a colorful tapestry or embroidery, and that's the correct use of the language taken from the Torah itself. Maskit is in a way like masechet, to interweave, okay? So all of this is fascinating, and it puts everything into context. Finally, Rambam is full of practical reasons for things we have. The incense simply fights bad smells. When you burn a lot of meat on an altar, actually doesn't smell very nice inside a building, so you bring ketoret. Now, of course, ketoret could be a sign of who is the true priest, but the Rambam doesn't go into that here. He gives you many reasons. So I'm doing this very briefly, just to give you a taste of what is going on here. Marcel, would you like to read about the sacrifices? Line 23.
Line 23. Sacrifices. Maimonides' instrumental anti-idolatry approach and the sacrifice of sacred animals like the Korban Pesach, democratization of sacrifice.
Okay, so the instrumental anti-adultery approach. Same thing with animal sacrifices, okay? Rambam says God didn't want them, but people like doing that, and they couldn't serve God in any other way. So we remember the famous passage in Book 2, chapter 32, when he says there's a primary intention and a secondary intention. God says, you know what? I see you've got to offer sacrifices. So offer them to me in my temple with my rules. And then he says, and don't ask me why we have goats and not lambs, or why we have 7 and not 8. All that is because you have to have some kind of number and choice if you're going to have a sacrificial rite. But I really don't want that. And then, of course, he cites all the psukim from the Nevi'im, especially Yirmiyahu. I really wasn't interested in korbanot. And I think I probably cited to you, Rav Kook, that in the third temple, then the korbanot will be mincha. They will be meal offerings. As it says, V'arva l'Hashem minchat Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, k'mei olam u'chshanim kadmoniot, that in the third temple, the meal offerings will be as pleasant to God as the old sacrifices, the animal sacrifices of yore, which made my very merciful granddaughter, who doesn't believe in harming animals, very happy when I told her this, when she started learning the book of Vayikra. So that is the first element. Korban Pesach, says the Rambam, is an exception. Korban Pesach was not there as part of the Mishkan, part of the sacrifices after the golden calf. Korban Pesach was for a different reason. That was to attack Egyptian idolatry. Because the Egyptians treated the lamb as a holy animal, we had to de-sanctify the lamb. We had to slaughter it and eat it, okay? Whether the Rambam was right, as I said, many of his ideas about what idolaters did was taken from the Sabian literature, which was available in Arabic and was what the Arabs or Muslims thought about the idolaters. They didn't know that much about them, okay? Because by the time Islam came on the scene in the 7th century, they didn't have contact with real pagans. It was either Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. I should say Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. But there we have it. Secondly, democratization of sacrifice. I'm not going to push the point, but the priestly regimes in the ancient world were powerful. They were in control. And it expresses itself eventually in medieval Christendom as well. Remember that when Joseph reorganized the Egyptian economy, he basically took all the land, centralized it under Pharaoh's ownership, and therefore he ran the agricultural economy of Egypt. But whose land could he not get?
Priest.
The
priest.
priest.
Priests. Admat HaKohanim, because they had the right to their land and nothing could. So what we do is we take away the priestly rank, and Adam ki akriv mikem korban Hashem. Anybody comes along, offers a sacrifice, doesn't need to go for the whole priestly thing, and therefore there was such an objection when Hophni and Pinchas, the sons of Shmuel, lord over the people who are bringing their offerings. They send their lad, remember, with the three pronged trident to stick into the pot to pick out the best pieces of meat. And the people say, no, you can't do that. There's an order. It has to be sacrificed first. The revolt against priestly dictatorship. Very important part, says Rambam, of our temple laws. Okay. What else? No leaven. Okay.
No
Marcel.
leaven or honey, only salt, because of the heathen practice.
Okay, so of course the heathens, the Sabians, they put leaven and honey, chametz and dvash. So therefore God says, no chametz or dvash, only salt. Et korban minchatcha b'melach timlach. Okay, time limits.
Time limits on eating of sacrificial meat because of health considerations.
Okay, we read, some of us read Ezel Mekoman in the morning. Marcel, do you read Ezel Mekoman?
So it was,
Do you read the section in the morning, the korbanot, Ezel Mekoman Shel Zvachim?
no,
When I
Well
am
done.
opinion,
right.
Well done. You don't need to. But if you were to read them, you'll see that each sacrifice has a day, 2 days, 3 days, and after that, it mustn't be eaten. Rambam says the reason is very simple. No refrigeration. Meat is left out. You have to eat it fast, otherwise it's going to go off, especially in a hot climate. If you have looked at animals of prey, lions, tigers, etc., they eat their meat straight away. Leopards can take them up a tree, okay? But basically, these time limits are there because of health. Good. Prohibition.
Prohibition on eating blood, which is the reason for Kisui Hadam, which is covering of the blood. Lo teshvu al Adam from Vayikra.
Right, now that's an interesting puzzle. Rambam says, no, what's this thing with eating blood?
אבל זה
Maybe
not לא
Parashat
תשבו, זה לא תאכלו.
You can't eat the blood, correct? Ki Adam hu ha-nefesh. Right, Jean?
I think there is a mistake. It's not לא תשבו על אדם, but לא תאכלו על אדם.
No, look
No,
at
no,
Vayikra
no, no.
Yutet.
It's in Kedoshim, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Lo teshvu al Adam. Rambam doesn't get things wrong.
י"ט.
Yeah, Yutet Pasuk Kavav. If it's not there, I'll eat the hat that I don't wear. Jean, what do you see?
לא תאכלו על אדם.
In Kedoshim?
In קדושים, the reference, י"ט חו"ב is לא תאכלו על אדם.
Al Adam. So where is
Lo tesh is also Lo teshvu, which is
Lo
one of
teshvu
the
al Adam?
indications for
Not at this reference.
Okay.
medical ethics.
Ah, the reference. Let's have a look.
I take my concordancia.
Lo teshvu al
Very
Adam, Lo
Very
teshvu al Adam
good.
re'echa.
I should have known.
Lo
Be
teshvu al Adam
careful.
re'echa, isn't it?
11th class. 46. Let's have a look. 46. 46. 46. Hey, hi Deb.
Never saw that happen.
Lo teshvu al Adam.
Lo teshvu al Adam re'echa.
No, it doesn't say lo teshvu al Adam. Re'echa.
What?
We have lo teshvu al Adam. Okay, Jean, can you have a look in your concordance for lo teshvu al Adam?
I see תשבו. בעבור תשבו בארץ גוישן,
No, 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 no.
פתח אוהל
no.
מועד תשבו,
No,
בסוכות תשבו, ואתם יבלים תשבו, אם שוב תשובו, באתי גזית. I don't think that such
It's definitely there. Lo teshu al adam means you shall not sit on the blood, and it's a very funny pasuk. And that's what the Rambam says, that the
לא
heathen...
תעמוד על הדם, או לא תעמוד על הדם רעך.
No, no, no. Lo tamod al adam re'ach
No, I think
is
it's
completely different.
different.
Mem Zayin. Mem Vav. Okay. There's a pasuk, you shall not sit on the blood, and the reason is because the heathens used to make a fetish of blood, and they would sit around with a dish of blood, and they would regard that as a magical practice. So I am looking through at present a very long section in chapter 46, looking for this pasuk, but maybe in Acharei Mot, and I'm still looking for it, but it is definitely there. It's a funny pasuk, and that's why somebody could look on their computer now and just type in Lo Teshvu al Adam, and okay, Lo Tochlu al Adam. All right, you know what? Let's just leave this for the time being. Let's ask about this pasuk. Lo Tochlu al Hadam. What does that mean? It could say Lo Tochlu Dam. Okay?
Or et haדם.
Should say Lo Tochlu Dam. Why Lo Tochlu al Hadam? Not sit on the blood. So that's the question, John. Okay? What is Lo Tochlu al Hadam?
Rashi says there are many midrashim on this pasuk.
Okay. So the thing is that it's a peculiar way of putting it. If it meant not to eat blood, then it should have said Lo Tochlu Dam, as we said in Parashat Tzav. So the thing is that you would have an idolatrous meal, and you'd have it around a big pot of blood, and that will be an idolatrous practice. Okay, so I think what I must have done is I'll find this Lo Teshu al Adam. It's probably not the pasuk. It's a commentary on the pasuk, that when you sit around and have and like all superstitious practices, people will take frogs' legs and a snake's venom, bubble, toil and trouble, mix them all up in some type of pot, sit around and have a meal. So the whole issue of blood for Rambam becomes again fighting idolatry. Then he goes on to useful lessons. Marcel, could you read on, please?
Useful lessons learned from different types of sacrifices, consumption of meat.
Okay, so useful lessons. There's a lot here, and what we're saying is that you learn about serious offenses, that you have a serious punishment, a much more expensive sacrifice. So you should be careful. The consumption of meat and wine at festivals,
and the hearing of music all create a positive emotional atmosphere for common people to be receptive to spirituality.
So here the thing is to contrast the austere temple sacrifice to the pagan sacrifice. Music, dancing, everybody becomes involved. It gets into sacred prostitution, sex, carnality, vayakumul tzachek. We, says the Rambam, are of course in no need of that, but the common people need to have something to make them feel uplifted when they come into the temple. So they put on a Hasidic pop concert. The Levim will sing, they'll play their instruments, all sorts of favorite Hasidic pop stars will come on the stage, and everybody will feel much more spiritual. But that, of course, is not the Rambam's idea of what true spirituality is. Okay, is that all clear? Now, I want to have, the next bit is very interesting. So we're going to start to read this. Alan, do you like to read? A short line, line 32.
The laws of purity and impurity, Tumah v'Tahara, are only relevant as far as entering the temple is concerned, and are aimed at creating limited access, which contributes greatly to the awe and reverence in which the temple is held. Purity and impurity are also instrumental. They are not concepts of an inherent nature.
Now here the Rambam really does something quite amazing. Tumah and Tahara. Who does not come out of a traditional Orthodox education, not believing that Tumah and Tahara are real things that you have to take great pains to avoid? We all know about Tumat HaNidah, but Tumah and Tahara can be all over. If you have a very Orthodox upbringing, Tumah is lurking around every corner. Anything you could touch, walking in an inappropriate place, it's all there. And all sorts of natural phenomena, okay, become sources of Tumah, and we become absolutely terrified. And the television is, when I was young, the Tumah box. The Tumah box. That's what we called it, okay? In other words, Tumah and Tahara are real things. Rambam says nothing of the sort. Tumah and Tahara are only there to make access to the temple a rare event. You can't get there every day. Because if you want to keep something very grand and very special, you mustn't give people unlimited access to it. As we say in English, familiarity breeds
Contempt.
contempt. So, therefore, people are made to have awe and reverence for the temple, Mikdashit Tirao, and the whole of Tumah and Tahara is nothing to do with anything real. It's just a plan to keep you away from the Bet HaMikdash. And this is worthwhile a read. Zotiak Jean.
And how can you explain that Rambam devoted such a book about Tahara with all the details you cannot imagine?
So tell me why he devotes so many chapters to Korbanot.
Okay, with so many details.
And also Hilchot Bet HaBechira. So
this is the second thing. Rambam has no, he doesn't see, you see that he has an historic view, but he doesn't see any future perfection or spiritualization. Voilà. And,
well done.
And apparently he considers that at the end of the times, we will come back to the initial situation, what is framed. Similarly, in a subject which is more familiar to me, Rambam considers that there will be a new temple, and we will come back to the sanctification of the new moon and have a calendar like the Arabs today.
In his work of halacha, he says exactly that. But of course, when you look at the Moreh Nevukhim, he's doing something else. I'm going to talk about this and open a discussion with you leading it next time, all being well, okay? Because I just want to make the point really sharp now, because there's a lot in this chapter. Just get the flavor of the Rambam. This is an important introduction. Do not let it pass by your intellect. Think about it. ואחריה אומר כבר ביארנו שהכוונה כולה הייתה במקדש, להתחדש בו התפעלות לבוא אליו ושירא ויפחד. כאומרו מתשית תיראו. That's what the thing is there for, to make you filled with awe and reverence. וכל דבר נכבד כשיתמיד האדם לראותו, יחסר מה בנפש ממנו, וימעט בה מה שהיה מגיע בגללו מן ההתפעלות. But the more familiar something becomes, the less you are in awe and reverence. So shul, for example, the more you go to shul, most people tend to be more easygoing, okay? No awe or reverence. כבר העירו חכמים ז"ל על זה העניין ואמרו שאין טוב להיכנס למקדש בכל עת שירצה, וסמכו לזה לאמרו, הוקר רגליך מבית רעיך, פן ישבעך ושנאיך. Mishlei, this is the biblical counterpart of familiarity breeds contempt. Do not go too often to your friend's place, lest he gets sick and tired of you and ends up hating you, okay? So it's an important lesson in life. ומפני שהייתה זאת הכוונה, הסיר האלוה יתברך, הטמאים ייכנס למקדש. Therefore God says, you know what? If you're tamei, you're not allowed in. עם רוב מיני הטומאות, עד שכמעט לא תמצא אדם טהור, מאיתים, כי אם ינצל ממגן. Okay, so, right. Most people will be tamei most of the time, okay? Rak ma'atim, only a few people will not be tamei. Because if you do not touch a corpse of an animal, then you might touch a corpse of one of the 8 creepy crawlies. Are always around your home, lizards, mice, what have you. And if you're not touching them, food or drink that has become tamei, often you'll just step over them and you won't even know. 10, and you'll be touching nidot, or zav, somebody with a gonorrheal issue, or metzora, or a metzora, or mishkavan, or things that they lay on, tumat midras. or mikeri. And then you'll go and sleep with your wife, and then you'll become tamei all over again. And even if you become tahor, well, you won't be able to get into the mikdash until sunsets. And then you won't be able to come in at night. And then, of course, at that night, you'll sleep with your wife. Then the next day, you'll also be tamei. So you have to wait until the following night. V'yezeh kulo siba, line 14, litrachek min hamikdash, v'shelo yidruchu bo b'chol et. All this is going to keep you a long way away from the Bet HaMikdash. Uchva yadata omram, ein adam nichnas lazara, la'avoda, filu tahor ad shehu tovel. And then on top of all of that, we don't come into the Bet Mikdash until we've done tefillah. If you want to go up to the Temple Mount, by the way, what do you have to do?
Go to mikvah.
You have to go to the mikvah, even though you may be perfectly pure, okay? Technically. The attitude of mind, the awe that you have for God, which is what we want to achieve and inculcate in Judaism, not something close, carnal that you can use, the idolatrous practices, but a God who stands way up, okay? That is done by keeping people out of the temple. And Tumah and Tahara serve this very well, okay? ובאלו הפעולות תתמיד היראה ויגיע, וכל אשר תהיה הטומאה יותר נמצאת, תהיה הטהרה ממנה יותר כבדה וזמנה יותר ארוך. The more common the tumah, the longer it takes to get away from it. He says, we're always tumat oil. People are dying all the time. You're in the same building as they were. And so you're going to be tamei met. Tamei met needs a paraduma, a red heifer, needs the ashes. It's a whole process, very rare. And we're never going to be out of it. So all of this, and now we go to the bold bit, line 20. Many useful things from the laws of Tumah and Tahara, Shmirat HaMikdash, the right atmosphere in the temple. ולהקל הטורח ההוא מעל האדם, ושלא ימנעהו עניין הטומאה והטהרה מעסק מעסקיו. כי זאת המצווה של טומאה וטהרה אינה נתלית רק במקדש וקדושיו ולא בזולתם. Actually, says the Rambam, according to the Torah, Tumah and Tahara only interest us when it comes to going into the Bet HaMikdash. Otherwise, who cares? If you're a Kohen, yes, but then you're part of the Bet HaMikdash. But a regular Israelite could be Tamei. Times of the Tanakh, times of the Mishnah. Chachamim Prushim said we're going to be Chaverim. we are going to take upon ourselves the extra chumrah. Rambam would say in the Moreh Nevukhim, idiocy. You not only make divisions between the people, but you don't need to do any of this. Ochel chulin b'tara has nothing to do with the reason for the Bet HaMikdash, especially if there is no Bet HaMikdash. But we like to do it because of this concept of tara being an inherent quality in the world, and tumah, Rambam would say, ridiculous. Ulakel al toreach hahu. Ki zot ha-mitzvah, okay. B'chol kodesh lo tigav mikdash, lo tavo. אבל זולתם אין חטא עליו, אם יישאר טמא כל אשר ירצה ויאכל חולין טמאים כמו שירצה. You can eat your regular food and be tamei, perfectly halachically correct. Jean.
Did Rambam wash before eating bread?
I'm sure he did.
Accordingly, if he's tamei, he must drink. Enfin, bon, it's not very consequent on what he says.
He would say, Zecher le'mikdash kihilel. Okay? Okay. But I'm only reading the Moreh Nevukhim.
Yes, I understand.
By the way, my last shiur will be the aftermath. What happened to the Moreh Nevukhim after it was spread shortly after the Rambam died. And we'll have a lot to say then. But he goes on to say something very interesting, okay? We do have a tradition in the Middle East. The Magusi are, of course, the Majesty, okay? Majus is Arabic for a Zoroastrian. Zarathustra, Zoroastrianism, the fire worshippers, the Magi of the New Testament, it's all the same. The laws of Nidah, if you go into Persian Zoroastrianism, are extremely strict. What do? They say that we have to burn all the things that the Nidah stepped on. You may not speak to her. And if a wind blew and the same wind passed over you, then you are tamei.
Oh, yeah.
Re'ei kama ben zeu ben amarenu. Look, says the Rambam, how different we are. The Gemara says, Kol malachot she'isha osa leba'ala nidah osa leba'ala. One's nidah wife can do everything that she needs to do at home, except for washing her husband's face, etc. Basically, it's only intercourse when she is a
Nidah.
And Nidah has all sorts of roots to it. By the way, there's a famous chumrah that based upon, again, halakhic sources, that if one gives birth, you have to wait 40 days before resuming intercourse after a male, 80 days after a female. Rambam says this is a minhag minut. He actually, in the Mishneh Torah, says this is an idolatrous practice. As soon as one's wife is no longer nidah, you count the 7 days, you were able to have intercourse. All of that, the 40 and 80 days are just for going to the Bet HaMikdash. There's no Bet HaMikdash. It doesn't matter. Rambam says that the Tumah Tara also makes sure that we don't need to spend too much time in the Bet HaMikdash. We can continue with our lives. And anyhow, we haven't had the Bet HaMikdash for a long time, and we're not necessarily in any worse place. So we are now getting to the end of our time. In fact, we have another minute. So I might say something else about this when we begin again, but he does say there are many aspects of Tumah and Tara that I don't understand, okay, like the purification process for the Metzorah, okay, and things to do with Tzarat, but this is definitely a revolutionary idea. Tumah and Tara is a means of inculcating respect for the Bet HaMikdash. Things that Rambam says are quite remarkable here, okay? And we know he wrote all of this, by the way. The Moreh Nevukhim is definitely available in his handwriting, signed off in his signature, and you can see it, I believe, to this day. So this is, as you can imagine, pretty shocking stuff. And it was. But for the circle that he was speaking to, this spoke very well. Tuman Tara, concepts that actually inhere in real things, difficult to understand. And many of these things that are tameh, like nida or zav, they are natural things, okay? So to say that that becomes tumah, negative, can't have contact, one wonders why. So now we have a way of understanding it. The pure rationalist will say, aha, to keep us out of the Bet HaMikdash. If you don't need to get to the Bet HaMikdash, Tumah and Tara are really not applicable. And therefore, to most of us, we never have any contact with all these laws. The Rambam wrote them. He wrote the laws of Tumah and Tara. He wrote the laws of Korbanot. He wrote the laws of the Bet HaBechirah, of the temple, in great detail according to the Torah Shebal Peh. So, what we read now is undoubtedly going to be shocking, and we don't really know much, okay, about and it's difficult for us to grasp this because of our education, the way we are primed to think. But time has run out, so we're going to have to talk about this next week, and then we'll have the dietary laws and the sex laws, and then we can move on to what happened to the Moreh Nevukhim for 300 years after it was first spread about and the first printed edition, and why perhaps is not on the syllabus or wasn't on the syllabus in Volozhin or in Brisk in Lithuania. Okay, I'll stop the share. Anybody like to make a comment? Good evening, Bernard. Good evening, Bernie. Okay. Hi, Val.
Okay.
All right, so anybody have a comment, would like to say something? It's all quiet out there. So I guess I've given you something to digest. And I look forward to sharing some insights with you next week.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,